The Rock pushed open the thick glass door of Riptide, the upscale restaurant he had poured sweat, heart, and dreams into building in the heart of Miami. It was Friday night, and the atmosphere inside was like a vibrant tropical symphony, reverberating through the expansive space with its soaring ceilings. The clink of cocktail glasses colliding at the glossy ebony bar mingled with the sizzle of lobster grilling over an open fire in the far corner, where chefs performed like true artists. The air was thick with the tantalizing aroma of fresh seafood, laced with the sharp zest of lime and a faint saltiness from the ocean just a few blocks away, transporting anyone who stepped inside to a distant island paradise. Soft golden light spilled from Polynesian-style chandeliers, woven bamboo strands dangling overhead, onto meticulously set tables, crisp white linens without a single wrinkle, square porcelain plates with silver trim glinting under the glow, and small tropical flower arrangements of orchids and frangipani serving as gentle welcoming touches. The Rock paused for a moment at the threshold, letting his eyes adjust to the warm light and bustling energy. He wore a black baseball cap pulled low over his famous face, a loose gray t-shirt hugging his muscular frame without flaunting it, and olive cargo pants. Nothing to suggest he was the owner of this place. To him, Riptide wasn't a vanity project to show off or a way to burn through Hollywood cash after blockbuster deals. He'd spent years perfecting the menu, from the spicy Polynesian-style grilled grouper inspired by childhood campfire nights with family in Hawaii, to the Wagyu beef slider with signature BBQ sauce he'd tasted at a roadside joint in Texas during a long road trip. He'd handpicked the best chefs, not just for their skill, but for their understanding that food wasn't just about flavor. It was about emotion, about stories. He wanted Riptide to be a place where anyone, from locals in flip-flops with tight budgets to Miami's elite in expensive suits, felt at home, part of the family he'd built from scratch. But The Rock also knew a harsh truth, a lesson learned from his earliest days. No restaurant, no matter how successful, ran smoothly on paper figures or customer praise alone. He'd sat in his spacious Los Angeles office, reading Riptide's monthly revenue reports, beautiful numbers showing steady growth, tightly controlled costs, and profits exceeding expectations. He'd scrolled through five-star Yelp reviews calling Riptide a gem on Miami's coast, or articles in prestigious food magazines dubbing it a must-visit destination, complete with glossy photos of seared short ribs glistening under the lights. But he didn't trust those things. Not because he doubted his team, but because he knew the real story of a restaurant or any business didn't lie in profits or fame. It lay in the shadows, the places the golden lights didn't reach, the exhausted sighs of staff after a 12-hour shift, the anxious glances they thought no one saw, or the whispered stories in the break room that never made it into any report. He'd seen it as a kid working in his family's Honolulu diner, servers smiling at customers, but collapsing in the kitchen to rub aching feet, or the best cooks quitting over a single harsh word from the boss. That's why he was here tonight, unannounced and understated, just a man in casual clothes stepping into his own restaurant like any other patron. Every few months, The Rock performed this ritual, disguised, observing, listening. He didn't do it to catch mistakes or micromanage. He did it to ensure Riptide wasn't just a money-making machine, but a place where everyone, from chefs to servers to bartenders, was treated fairly, respected the way he'd always tried to treat those around him on his journey from wrestler to global movie star. Tonight, the restaurant was at the peak of Friday dinner service, what he called the moment of truth, when everything either shone brilliantly or revealed cracks no one wanted to admit. He stepped further inside, his sneakers silent on the polished Italian marble floor, a detail he'd chosen for understated luxury. Staff glided past each other in a choreographed dance, carrying silver trays laden with grilled lobster, dripping with garlic butter, sizzling short ribs still steaming, and frosty mojitos garnished with fresh mint like green jewels. The tables were full, an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary with sparkling eyes, a group of young friends laughing over craft beers, and lone diners with glasses of red wine, their gazes heavy with quiet contemplation. A small band in the corner played gentle jazz, the saxophone's low notes blending with the distant crash of waves, creating an ambiance both relaxing and alive. Everything seemed perfect. just as he'd envisioned when he first signed the deed for this plot 3 years ago, standing on a sandy beachfront and imagining a place where people could escape life's pressures. But The Rock wasn't fooled by appearances. He'd lived long enough, weathered enough highs and lows, from being cut from his college football team to sleeping in a truck during his early wrestling days, to know perfection was often a thin veneer, hiding deeper issues. He moved toward the bar, his sharp eyes scanning the floor like a panther surveying its territory. In the far corner, he spotted Victor Grayson, Riptide's manager. The tall, lean man in a crisply ironed black shirt stood rigid as a pillar amid the flow of people, his dark brown eyes sweeping over tables with cold focus. Arms crossed tightly, his stance didn't feel like that of a dedicated manager. It felt like a controller waiting for someone to slip up so he could pounce. The Rock's brow furrowed slightly, an unconscious reflex. He hadn't met Victor often. Most communication was via email or through assistants. But something about the man's demeanor set him on edge. It wasn't the attentiveness of a good leader. It was the dominance of someone who relished power. He lingered near the bar, adjusting his cap as an excuse to watch closer. Victor suddenly turned to a staff member, a petite girl with her hair tied high, and pointed at a tablecloth misaligned by a few inches on an empty table. "How many times have I told you?" His voice cut through the din, not loud but sharp enough to slice. "There's no room for sloppiness here. Fix it now." The girl scrambled to obey, her hands trembling as she straightened the cloth, head bowed as if afraid to meet his gaze. Victor nodded, a thin smile curling his lips. Not the satisfaction of a job well done, but the smugness of authority reaffirmed. The Rock clenched his fist in his pocket but kept his face neutral. He didn't have enough to judge yet, but that uneasy feeling in his chest, what he called his street instincts from his rough Honolulu days, was stirring. He was about to sit at the bar, where Nate, the young bartender with a friendly grin, was wiping glasses with a craftsman's focus, when a faint sound drifted from the hallway near the kitchen. A sob, stifled but distinct, like wind whistling through a crack on a stormy night. The Rock slowed, tilting his head toward the staff break room door, where a sliver of fluorescent light spilled out. He leaned closer, straining to hear. The crying wasn't loud, not the outburst of an overworked shift or a gripe about a rude customer. It was the sound of someone holding back, as if terrified of being heard. He edged nearer, his sneakers silent on the stone, and through the gap he glimpsed a young woman, Lila Bennett, her name tag read on her black riptide apron. Head bowed, hands gripping the edge of a metal table, like she was anchoring herself from collapse. Beside her stood Jaden Carter, another server with curly hair and freckles, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, whispering urgently but too low for the Rock to catch. He froze, breath steadying, eyes narrowing like he was sizing up an opponent in the wrestling ring. Lila didn't look up, but in the dim light, her shoulders trembled, her knuckles white against the table. Jaden said something, only fragments like, "Can't," and "tell someone" reached him, before Lila shook her head fiercely, her voice shaky but restrained. "No, Jaden, I can't." The Rock shifted closer, but the door swung shut as another staff member, a tall guy with a tray of dirty dishes, passed by, blocking his view. The crying faded, but the image, Lila's hollow eyes, the way she curled into herself like a trapped animal, seared into his mind like a blade. Something was very wrong, he thought. He'd seen those looks before, in his family's diner, when a young server broke down after a ruthless scolding, or on long film shoots when an exhausted crew member stayed silent for fear of losing their job. But Lila's wasn't just fatigue or stress. It was fear, deep, lingering, and real. The Rock turned back, walking to the bar with a calm exterior, but inside a plan was forming. He wouldn't leave Riptide tonight until he uncovered the truth. Not as Dwayne Johnson, movie star, but as a man who couldn't stand by while someone suffered in the home he'd built. Johnson settled onto the high stool at Riptide's bar, his back resting lightly against the soft leather cushion, though his body didn't truly relax. His sturdy hands rested on the glossy ebony countertop, fingers tapping a subtle rhythm, a habit from his wrestling days, waiting for an opponent to reveal a weakness. He'd just heard Lila Bennett's cry, soft, suppressed, but sharp like a knife piercing the restaurant's false calm. The image of the young woman clinging to the metal table in the break room, shoulders trembling, wouldn't leave his mind. He'd seen moments like this before, not in the glitz of Hollywood or grand movie premieres, but in his early days, washing dishes in a rundown Honolulu diner for a few bucks, watching servers grit their teeth through a boss's tirades because they had no other choice. But this was Riptide, his restaurant, where he'd vowed to create something different. So why was someone crying in the shadows like this? He looked up, signaling Nate, the young bartender with tousled brown hair and an easy smile, who was wiping a cocktail glass with a white cloth, focused like a craftsman. "Just a water," The Rock said, his voice low and steady, as if he were any regular customer looking to cool off on a humid Miami night. Nate nodded quickly. "Coming right up, man," then turned to grab a tall glass from the shelf behind him, pouring from a stainless steel pitcher with beads of condensation rolling down its side. As he set the glass in front of The Rock, a droplet slid from the base, leaving a faint shimmering streak on the counter under the golden light. The Rock took a sip, the coolness sliding down his throat, but his eyes weren't on the water. They scanned the restaurant floor, picking up details like a detective hunting for clues. In the far corner, Victor Grayson still stood, tall and lean in his crisply ironed black shirt, arms crossed like an invisible wall separating him from the rest of the place. His dark brown eyes swept over every table, missing nothing. A spoon misaligned on a napkin, a wine glass not filled to the brim, a staff member moving a few seconds slower than his desired pace. The Rock's brow furrowed slightly as he watched Victor point at a table near the window, where a couple chatted animatedly over steaming seafood plates. "Tablecloth," Victor said, his voice not loud but cold as steel, cutting through the restaurant's hum. A petite server, hair tied high, eyes anxious, hurried over, bending to adjust the white cloth shifted a few inches off-center. "How many times have I told you?" Victor went on, his tone unchanging, but edged with a sharpness that made the girl's shoulders hunch. "No room for sloppiness here. Do it again." She nodded quickly, hands trembling as she straightened the fabric, head bowed as if afraid to look up at him. Victor nodded, a thin smile curling his lips. Not the satisfaction of a manager seeing a job done, but the smugness of someone asserting dominance. The Rock gripped his glass tighter, the coolness of the crystal not enough to quell the heat simmering in his chest. He didn't like how Victor stood there, didn't like how he spoke to the staff, like they weren't people, but puppets in a play he directed. But he didn't have enough to act yet. He needed to watch more, to understand what was happening before stepping in, not as Dwayne Johnson, Riptide's owner, but as an ordinary customer, someone no one suspected. He turned back to Nate, who'd just finished wiping a glass and was stacking it on the shelf with swift precision. "Busy night, huh?" The Rock said, his tone casual like small talk. "How you holding up?" Nate shrugged, offering a tight smile. "Same as any Friday, man. Packed house, things get a little tense, but it's fine." His voice was light, but The Rock caught the quick glance Nate shot toward Victor before answering. A small, almost unconscious flick of the eyes, but enough to note. He took another sip of water, keeping his expression relaxed. "Your manager looks strict," he said, voice even, like he was commenting on the weather outside, where sea breezes rustled the palms along Ocean Drive. Nate paused, wiping a glass for a second, hands stalling on the cloth, then gave an awkward laugh. "Victor, yeah, he likes things his way. Normal stuff, manager things." But the way he dipped his head right after, resuming his wiping with faster motions, told a different story. The Rock nodded faintly, not pressing further. He knew how to read people, from his days in the service industry before Hollywood, from long nights in the ring when he had to guess whether an opponent would throw a punch or a lock next. Truth wasn't in words. It was in the pauses, the small gestures people couldn't control. And tonight, Riptide was hiding something beneath its polished surface. He could feel it in every beat of his heart. He glanced at the floor again, and that's when he saw Jaden Carter emerge from the break room. The young man with curly hair and a freckled face looked more tense than usual, hands fidgeting with the order pad in his apron pocket, as if trying to stay calm. Behind him came Lila Bennett, eyes red-rimmed, but quickly wiped with her sleeve, forcing a weak smile as she stepped out to serve. She moved slower than the restaurant's rhythm, not out of laziness, but as if each step carried an invisible weight. The Rock frowned. He'd been a server once, stood for hours with aching feet after long shifts, faced customers so rude he wanted to slam a table. He knew the job's pressure, the stickiness of spilled sauce on shoes, hands trembling from juggling too many trays, a voice hoarse from reciting the menu 100 times. But something in Lila's demeanor wasn't typical exhaustion. It was fear, a fear he'd seen in the eyes of old coworkers, ones too scared to speak up, afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of punishment. He stood pretending he needed the restroom, but really moving closer to the server station, a small nook near the kitchen where staff dropped off trays, grabbed clean napkins, and prepped plates for new orders. Jaden was there, hunched over a stack of white porcelain plates, arranging them with quick but clumsy motions, like he was keeping his hands busy to stay steady. The Rock approached, keeping his tone soft but firm enough to get attention. "Hey, you," he called. "Can I borrow a pen?" Jaden flinched, looking up with wide eyes, then fumbled in his apron for a black ballpoint. "Here, man," he said, voice shaky as he handed it over. The Rock took it, but didn't leave. He glanced at Jaden's name tag, Jaden Carter printed clearly on white plastic, then continued, voice casual. "Thanks, Jaden. I noticed your friend doesn't seem okay." Jaden stiffened, his grip tightening on the plates until his knuckles whitened. "She's fine," he said, too fast, like a rehearsed line. The Rock tilted his head slightly, keeping his tone low and steady. "She doesn't look fine." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the kitchen's sizzle and distant chatter of diners. Jaden swallowed hard, his eyes flicking toward Victor, now near the VIP table, chatting with a group in expensive suits, before dropping back to the floor. After a long pause, he sighed, voice barely a whisper. "She's not okay, but it's her business." The Rock raised an eyebrow, not breaking eye contact. "Her business, and she's crying in the break room?" His voice stayed gentle, but carried a weight Jaden couldn't ignore. The young man bit his lip, clearly wrestling inside. His hands tightened on the plates, as if they were the only thing keeping him upright. Finally, after a heavy silence, he exhaled, voice so low, the Rock had to lean in. "Not the customers. It's, you know." His eyes darted to Victor again, but he didn't say more. Another quick glance, lightning fast, but enough for the Rock to see that Victor Grayson wasn't just a strict manager to Jaden. He was a threat. The Rock nodded slowly, giving Jaden's shoulder a light pat, reassuring but not pushy. "Thanks for the pen," he said, then walked back to the bar, steps calm as if the exchange had been nothing more than a passing question. But his mind was racing. Not the customers, so who? Victor was the obvious answer, but he needed more proof, needed to grasp the full picture before acting. He slid back onto his stool, sipping his water, but his thoughts weren't on the glass. They drifted to Riptide's early days when he stood on an empty lot of sand and dust, blueprints in hand, promising himself this wouldn't just be a money machine. It'd be a family, a place where people got the respect he'd fought for his whole life. He remembered opening night, cutting the red ribbon before hundreds of guests, grinning wide and telling them, "Riptide's not just a restaurant, it's our home." But if Lila was crying, if Jaden was scared, that home was broken, and he couldn't stand by and watch. He glanced at Lila again. She stood near a window table, holding a water pitcher for a family of 3, a kid playing with a spoon on the table. Her smile was stiff, eyes still red but hidden as she dipped her head, letting her long brown hair shield part of her face. As she poured, her hand trembled slightly, a few drops spilling over the glass onto the white tablecloth. She wiped it quickly with her sleeve, muttering an apology, but her eyes weren't there. They flicked to Victor, checking if he'd seen her tiny mistake. Victor didn't. He was still with the VIPs, flashing a practiced smile. The Rock knew was fake, but the way Lila shrank, the way she gripped the pitcher, screamed she was terrified of being caught, of being punished. The Rock set his glass down, the simmering heat in his chest now a steady flame. He recalled a memory from his days at the family diner in Honolulu. A server named Maria, a single mom with bright but weary eyes, had sobbed in the kitchen corner after the boss chewed her out for dropping a plate. He'd stood there, a clumsy 16-year-old, unsure what to do, but hand her a cup of water and say, "You don't deserve that." Maria had given a sad smile, telling him, "You don't get it, Dwayne. Sometimes you take it because you've got no choice." That stuck with him. Through wrestling years, nights sleeping in a truck when no one would hire him, every time he rose from failure to become the man he was now. He'd sworn if he ever had power, a chance, he'd never let anyone feel like Maria, like Lila again. But he couldn't act yet. He wasn't Dwayne Johnson, Riptide's owner in this moment. He was just a guy in a cap and gray tee, unnoticed. To find the truth, he needed patience, needed to watch more. He looked at Victor again. The manager had left the VIP table, striding toward the restaurant's center, hands in his pockets with a cold confidence. As he passed Lila, she dipped her head lower, shoulders hunching like she wanted to vanish. Victor paused for a second, eyeing her, then said something, too quiet for The Rock to hear. But the way his lips curled, the way Lila visibly shook harder, told him it wasn't encouragement. The Rock clenched his fists under the bar, nails digging into his palms. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he knew one thing. Lila wasn't just stressed from work. She was scared of Victor Grayson. And if Victor was the cause, if he was breaking the promise The Rock had made for Riptide, this wouldn't stand. He took a deep breath, letting the restaurant's cool air ease the heat inside, then turned to Nate. "Let me get some fried calamari," he said, voice steady. Nate nodded. "Right away, man," scribbling it down. The Rock nodded back, but his eyes stayed on Lila, on Victor. He'd stay here longer tonight, longer than planned, and he'd uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. The Rock leaned back in the high-back bar stool at Riptide, the leather creaking faintly under his weight as he took another sip of water. The ice clinked softly against the glass, a small sound drowned out by the lively hum of the restaurant around him. Laughter from a table of friends near the window, the sizzle of seafood hitting the open grill, the faint trill of a saxophone weaving through the air from the live jazz trio in the corner. His plate of calamari arrived, golden and crisp, steam rising from the pile of tender rings, dusted with smoked paprika and paired with a side of tangy aioli. A dish he'd personally approved for the menu after tasting it in a tiny seaside shack during a film shoot in the Caribbean. He picked up a piece, popped it into his mouth, and chewed slowly, savoring the crunch and the burst of flavor. It was perfect, just as he'd intended. But tonight, the food wasn't what held his attention. His eyes, sharp and unwavering beneath the brim of his black baseball cap, darted between Lila Bennett, Jaden Carter, and Victor Grayson, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed an hour ago. The brief exchange with Jaden had confirmed his suspicions. Something was wrong at Riptide, and Victor was at the center of it. Lila's tear-streaked face, her trembling hands, and the way Jaden's voice had dropped to a whisper when he'd hinted at the manager's involvement, they weren't just signs of a tough night. They were symptoms of a deeper rot, one that The Rock couldn't ignore. He'd built this place to be a sanctuary, a reflection of the values he'd fought for his whole life: hard work, respect, family. If Victor was poisoning that vision, turning Riptide into a place of fear instead of pride, then he'd misjudged the man he'd hired to run it, and that was on him. The thought gnawed at him, a dull ache in his chest that mingled with the heat of determination. He wasn't leaving tonight until he had answers, not half-truths or excuses, but the raw, unfiltered reality of what was happening under his roof. He glanced at Lila again. She was back at work now, moving between tables with a forced smile plastered across her face. She carried a pitcher of water in one hand, refilling glasses with mechanical precision, but her movements were stiff, her shoulders hunched as if she were bracing for something. When she reached a table near the bar, a family of 3 with a little boy who kept banging his spoon against the plate, she paused to pour, and The Rock noticed her hand shake again. A few drops splashed onto the tablecloth, a tiny mistake that wouldn't have mattered to most people. But Lila flinched, her eyes darting toward Victor like a deer sensing a predator. She quickly dabbed at the spot with her sleeve, muttering an apology to the family, who waved it off with a laugh. Victor didn't see it. He was still near the VIP table, chatting with a group of men in tailored suits, his posture relaxed but his eyes calculating. But Lila's reaction told The Rock everything he needed to know. She wasn't just tired or overworked. She was terrified of making a mistake, terrified of Victor noticing. He set the calamari down, his appetite fading as the pieces started to fit together. He'd seen this before, not in a restaurant, but in other arenas of life. Back in his wrestling days, he'd worked under promoters who ruled with an iron fist, barking orders and dangling paychecks like carrots to keep everyone in line. He'd watched good people, talented wrestlers with dreams bigger than the ring, shrink under that kind of control, their spirits crushed by threats and manipulation. Later in Hollywood, he'd met directors and producers who thrived on power trips, berating crew members until they were too afraid to speak up. The Rock had always pushed back against that. He'd walked off sets, called out bullies, and made it clear he wouldn't tolerate it on his own projects. But here, in Riptide, it was different. This was his house, his legacy. If that same kind of toxicity had taken root here, he'd failed the people he'd promised to protect. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and he clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. He couldn't storm in yet. He needed proof, not just gut instinct. He turned his attention back to the bar, where Nate was mixing a mojito for a customer a few stools down. The kid moved with a quiet efficiency, muddling mint leaves with a pestle, pouring rum with a steady hand, topping it off with a splash of soda water that fizzed under the lights. The Rock waited until Nate finished and slid the drink across the counter before speaking again. "Good hands," he said, nodding toward the cocktail. "You've got a knack for this." Nate grinned, a flicker of pride breaking through his usual guarded demeanor. "Thanks, man. Been at it a while. Keeps me sane on nights like this." The Rock chuckled, keeping his tone casual. "Yeah, I bet. Looks like a full house tonight. Everyone holding up okay?" Nate shrugged, wiping his hands on a towel slung over his shoulder. "Mostly. Fridays are always nuts. People drinking, orders piling up. You know the drill. We manage." He hesitated, then added, "Some nights are tougher than others, though." The Rock tilted his head, picking up on the slight shift in Nate's voice. "Tough how?" he asked, keeping it light, like he was just making small talk. Nate glanced around, quick, subtle, but The Rock caught it before answering. "Just the usual. Long hours, picky customers, and Victor likes things a certain way. Keeps us on our toes." There it was again, Victor's name, dropped like a stone into a still pond, rippling through the conversation. The Rock leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the counter. "Certain way, huh? He's a stickler, I take it?" Nate nodded, a little too fast. "Yeah, you could say that. He's big on details, table settings, timing, all that. Doesn't miss a thing." The Rock smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sounds like a guy who runs a tight ship. That a good thing or a bad thing around here?" Nate paused, his hand stalling on the towel. For a split second, his guard slipped, and The Rock saw something flicker in his eyes. Unease, maybe even frustration, before he caught himself. "Good, mostly," Nate said, his voice careful. "Keeps the place sharp. But sometimes, it's a lot. For some people more than others." The Rock didn't push right away. He took another bite of calamari, chewing slowly to give Nate a moment to relax, then asked, "Some people like who?" Nate's eyes flicked toward Lila, who was now clearing plates from a table across the room, then back to the counter. "Just, the ones who get the brunt of it. Newer folks mostly. They're still figuring things out." It was a dodge, a half-answer meant to deflect, but The Rock wasn't letting it slide. "That girl over there," he said, nodding subtly toward Lila. "She looks like she's having a rough night. She new?" Nate shook his head. "Nah. Lila's been here over a year. She's good. Great with customers, never complains. Just, tonight's not her night, I guess." The Rock studied Nate's face, the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way his fingers gripped the towel a little harder. The kid was holding back, and The Rock knew why. He'd seen it in 100 locker rooms, 100 film sets, people clamming up because they were scared of the consequences, scared of crossing the wrong person. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice just enough to keep it between them. "Not her night or not her manager?" Nate froze, his eyes locking onto The Rock's for a moment before dropping to the counter. "I didn't say that," he muttered, but the denial was weak, barely convincing himself, let alone The Rock. "Hey, relax," The Rock said, raising a hand in a calming gesture. I'm not here to stir trouble, just curious. I've worked places like this before, seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. If something's off, I'd rather know than guess. It was a half-truth. He'd worked in diners and bars as a kid, sure, but he wasn't just a curious bystander now. He was the man who owned the damn building, and he needed Nate to talk. Nate exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Look, man, it's not my place to say. Victor's the boss. He's strict, yeah, but that's his job, right? Keeps us in line. The Rock nodded but pressed gently. Strict's one thing. Scaring people's another. That girl, Lila, she looked scared back there. Not just tired. Scared. Nate didn't respond right away. He picked up a glass and started wiping it, even though it was already spotless, his movements mechanical. Finally he spoke, his voice so low, the Rock had to strain to hear over the jazz. She's not the only one, but it's not my story to tell. You'd have to ask her, or Jaden. They're closer to it. The Rock nodded, filing that away. Nate wasn't going to crack yet, but he'd given him a thread to pull. Jaden and Lila were the keys, and Victor was the lock he needed to break open. He finished the calamari, sliding the plate aside, and stood up, stretching his arms like he was just another guy working out a kink in his back after a long day. Thanks for the chat, Nate, he said, tossing a $10 bill on the counter as a tip. You're good people. Nate smiled faintly, pocketing the cash. Anytime, man. Enjoy your night. The Rock tipped his cap slightly and walked away, but his mind was racing. He needed to get closer to Jaden again. Maybe Lila too, but he had to be smart about it. Bursting in like a bull, his usual style, wouldn't work here. Not yet. He made his way toward the server station again, weaving through the tables with the ease of someone who'd spent years navigating crowded rooms. The dinner rush was still in full swing, the air thick with the scents of garlic butter, grilled fish, and the faint tang of lime from the cocktails. Jaden was there, stacking empty plates onto a tray, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Rock slowed his pace, pretending to check his phone as he approached, then stopped a few feet away. Hey, Jaden, he said, keeping his tone casual. You got a sec? Forgot to ask earlier. Any chance I could get a to-go box for the rest of my food? Jaden looked up, startled, then nodded quickly. Yeah, sure, man. Hang on. He ducked behind the station, rummaging through a stack of supplies, and emerged with a small styrofoam container. Here you go, he said, handing it over. The Rock took it, but lingered, leaning against the counter with an easy stance. Thanks. Busy night, huh? You holding up all right? Jaden shrugged, wiping his hands on his apron. Yeah, it's fine. Just the usual chaos. Keeps me moving. The Rock nodded, glancing around before lowering his voice. Saw your friend earlier. Lila, right? She seemed pretty shaken up back there. Everything okay with her? Jaden's shoulders stiffened, his fingers pausing on the edge of the tray. She's fine, he said, but the words came out flat, unconvincing. The Rock tilted his head, his gaze steady but not aggressive. Didn't look fine to me. Looked like she was crying her eyes out in that break room. That normal around here? Jaden swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the floor, then toward Victor, who was now standing near the hostess stand, clipboard in hand, barking orders at a new server who'd just seated a couple in the wrong section. It's not a big deal, Jaden said, his voice barely above a whisper. She just gets stressed sometimes. We all do. The Rock crossed his arms, keeping his posture relaxed but his tone firm. Stressed is one thing, scared is another, and she looks scared, man. You know something about that. Jaden's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. For a moment, the Rock thought he'd shut down completely, but then the kid exhaled sharply, his resolve cracking. It's not my place to say, he muttered, echoing Nate's deflection. But there was a tremor in his voice now, a hint of desperation. She's been here longer than me. She's tough. But, yeah, she's scared. We all are sometimes. The Rock leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near growl. Scared of what? Or who? Jaden's eyes flicked toward Victor again, and this time, he didn't look away. You see him over there? He said, his voice shaking but resolute. He's not just strict. He's He's got this way of making you feel like you're nothing. Like if you mess up, or even if you don't, he'll find a reason to come after you. Lila gets it worst. I don't know why, but she does. The Rock followed Jaden's gaze, watching Victor snap at the new server, a young guy who flinched with every word. Worst how, he pressed, his gut tightening with every second. Jaden hesitated, then shook his head. I shouldn't be saying this. If he finds out, he cut himself off, his breath hitching. The Rock placed a hand on the counter, his presence steadying. He won't. I'm not here to snitch. I just want to know what's going on. She's not okay, and you're not either. Talk to me. Jaden looked up, meeting the Rock's eyes for the first time, and something in that steady gaze seemed to break through his fear. He makes her stay late, he said finally, the words tumbling out like a confession. Alone, after everyone's gone. Says it's for inventory or cleaning, but it's not right. She comes in the next day looking like she hasn't slept, like she's afraid to even breathe. I've heard her crying before, more than once, and he acts like it's normal, like she owes him something. The Rock's blood ran cold, then hot, a surge of anger rising in his chest that he had to fight to keep under control. He'd heard stories like this, managers preying on vulnerable employees, using their authority to intimidate, to manipulate. He'd seen it in the wrestling world, in film studios, in every industry where power imbalances left people exposed. But hearing it here, in Riptide, hit different. This wasn't some distant rumor. This was happening under his watch, to his people. How long, monsieur? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Jaden swallowed. Months, maybe longer. She won't talk about it. Not to me, not to anyone. But it's bad. I know it is. Before The Rock could respond, a shadow fell over the server station. Victor Grayson stood there, clipboard still in hand, his sharp eyes narrowing as they landed on Jaden. Everything okay over here? He asked, his tone smooth but edged with something hard, something that made Jaden flinch. The Rock turned slowly, meeting Victor's gaze with a calm that belied the storm brewing inside him. Just getting a to-go box, he said, holding up the container with a faint smile. Jaden here was nice enough to help me out. Victor's lips twitched, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good, he said, clapping a hand on Jaden's shoulder. Too hard, too deliberate. Let's keep the focus on work, though. We've got a full house tonight. Jaden nodded quickly, his eyes dropping to the tray. Yes, sir. Victor lingered a moment longer, his gaze shifting to The Rock, assessing him like he was sizing up a threat. Then he turned and walked away, his steps measured, controlled. The Rock watched him go, his mind racing. Jaden's words echoed in his head. Makes her stay late, alone. It's not right. And the pieces started to snap into place. This wasn't just a tough boss. This was something darker, something calculated. He needed more than Jaden's account, though. He needed to hear it from Lila, or someone else who'd seen it up close. And he needed to see it for himself. He stepped away from the server station, heading toward the back of the restaurant where a hallway led to the restrooms and the break room. The dinner rush was starting to slow, tables emptying out as the clock ticked past 9. He passed a group of servers chatting near the kitchen, their voices hushed but tense, and caught a snippet of conversation. She's been in there forever. Victor's gonna flip if she doesn't come out soon. The Rock slowed, pretending to tie his shoelace, and listened. Another voice, older, gruffer. He's already on her case tonight. Poor kid can't catch a break. A third voice, softer. She should have quit months ago. I would have. He straightened up, his heart pounding. They were talking about Lila. He was sure of it. He glanced toward the break room door, still ajar, and made a decision. He pushed it open quietly, stepping into the small, fluorescent-lit space. The room was sparse. A metal table, a few folding chairs, a coffee machine humming in the corner, and a bulletin board plastered with schedules and faded flyers. Lila was there, alone now, sitting on one of the chairs with her head in her hands. She didn't hear him come in, didn't notice until he cleared his throat softly. She jolted upright, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, her hands flying to wipe her face. Sorry, I didn't see you, she stammered, standing up so fast the chair scraped against the tile floor. Bathroom's down the hall, sir. I'm not looking for the bathroom, The Rock said, keeping his voice gentle but firm. I'm looking to talk. You're Lila, right? She froze, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. Yeah. How'd you know that? He nodded toward her name tag. Saw it earlier. I'm just a customer, but I couldn't help noticing you seem upset. Wanted to check in. Lila's face crumpled for a second, then hardened, a mask sliding into place. I'm fine, she said, too quick, too rehearsed. Just taking a break. It's been a long night. The Rock stepped closer, not enough to crowd her, but enough to show he wasn't backing off. Long nights don't usually make people cry like that, he said. I heard you earlier. With Jaden. Sounded like more than just a tough shift. Lila's breath hitched, her eyes darting to the door like she expected someone to burst in. You shouldn't have heard that, she whispered. It's nothing, really. I'm okay. But her voice cracked on the last word, and her hands shook as she gripped the apron tighter. Lila, the Rock said, his tone softening. I've been around long enough to know when someone's not okay. And you're not. Whatever's going on, you don't have to carry it alone. Tell me what's happening. She stared at him, her lips trembling, and for a moment he thought she might break, might let it all spill out. But then the door swung open, and Victor's voice cut through the room like a blade. Lila, what the hell are you doing? Tables aren't going to clear themselves. She flinched, spinning toward him, her face paling. I was just... Victor didn't let her finish. Break's over. Get back out there. Now. His eyes flicked to the Rock, narrowing slightly. And you. Customers don't belong back here. Out. The Rock held his gaze unflinching, a silent challenge passing between them. Just checking on her, he said evenly. She didn't look well. Victor's smile was thin, brittle. She's fine. Aren't you, Lila? She nodded quickly, her voice barely audible. Yes, sir. The Rock stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes never left Victor's. All right, I'll go. Take care, Lila. He walked out, feeling Victor's stare boring into his back, but his mind was made up. That wasn't concern in Victor's voice. It was control, pure and simple, and Lila's reaction confirmed everything Jaden had said. This wasn't just a bad boss. This was a predator, and The Rock was done playing observer. He needed a plan. Tonight. The Rock stepped out of the break room, the fluorescent light fading behind him as the heavy door swung shut with a dull thud. The air in the hallway felt thick, charged with the weight of what he'd just witnessed. Lila Bennett's trembling form, her whispered denial, and Victor Grayson's cold, commanding interruption. His boots echoed faintly on the polished tile as he made his way back toward the main floor of Riptide. But his mind was a storm. Victor's voice still rang in his ears. Tables aren't going to clear themselves. Sharp and dismissive, a tone that didn't just demand obedience, but crushed any hint of resistance. Lila's flinch, the way her shoulders had curled inward like a shield, told him more than her words ever could. This wasn't just a manager pushing his team too hard. This was a man who thrived on fear, who wielded his authority like a weapon. And The Rock had seen enough. The restaurant had slowed down now, the dinner rush winding to a close. Tables that had been packed with chattering guests an hour ago were emptying out, leaving behind crumpled napkins, half-finished drinks, and the faint buzz of lingering conversations. The jazz trio in the corner had shifted to a slower tune, a melancholic saxophone weaving through the air, softening the edges of the night. Servers moved with less urgency, stacking plates and wiping down surfaces, their faces etched with the exhaustion of a long shift. The Rock paused near the bar, his eyes scanning the room. Nate was still there, polishing glasses with a rhythmic precision, his shoulders slumping slightly as the night wore on. Jaden was across the floor, balancing a tray of dirty dishes, his jaw tight as he avoided looking toward the hostess stand where Victor stood, clipboard in hand, barking orders at a hostess who'd misplaced a reservation. The Rock's hands clenched into fists at his sides, the muscles in his forearms flexing beneath the loose sleeves of his gray t-shirt. He'd wanted more time, more evidence, more witnesses to build an airtight case against Victor. But what he'd seen in that break room, what he'd heard from Jaden and glimpsed in Nate's hesitance, was enough. Lila wasn't just stressed or overworked. She was trapped, cornered by a man who'd turned her job, her livelihood, into a cage. And every second he waited, every moment he let Victor stay in control, was another second she suffered. He couldn't stomach it. Not here, not in Riptide, the place he'd built to be a haven, not a hellhole. He'd spent his life fighting bullies, on the wrestling mat, in boardrooms, on film sets, and he wasn't about to let one run rampant under his own roof. He took a deep breath, the scent of garlic butter and sea salt filling his lungs, grounding him as he made his decision. No more undercover, no more watching from the shadows. It was time to step into the light, not as a random customer in a ball cap, but as Dwayne Johnson, the man who owned every inch of this place. He adjusted his cap one last time, a habit from his wrestling days before stepping into the ring, then started across the floor, his stride steady and purposeful. His eyes locked onto Lila first. She was near the window tables now, clearing a set of plates from a family that had just left, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was trying to disappear into the task. Her apron was stained with a splash of sauce, her hair falling loose from its ponytail, framing a face pale with fatigue. She didn't see him coming, didn't notice until he was a few feet away. "Excuse me," he said, his voice loud enough to cut through the ambient noise, but soft enough not to startle her too badly. She jumped anyway, the plates clattering slightly in her hands as she turned to face him. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Her eyes widened, a mix of confusion and panic flashing across her features. I'm with a table, sir," she stammered, glancing at the empty seats as if hoping they'd magically refill to give her an excuse. A woman at a nearby table, sipping a glass of Chardonnay, frowned and chimed in, "She's working. You can wait." The Rock ignored her, keeping his focus on Lila. "It's important," he said, his tone firm but kind, a lifeline he hoped she'd grab onto. "Just a minute, please." Lila hesitated, her fingers tightening around the stack of plates, then nodded reluctantly. She set the dishes down on a nearby cart and stepped away from the table, following him a few paces to a quieter corner near the bar. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her apron, her eyes darting nervously toward the floor, the ceiling, anywhere but him. What can I help you with, sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Rock took a slow breath, steadying himself. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about getting answers anymore. It was about giving her a way out. "Lila," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, "I know what's happening. You don't have to say anything yet, but I need you to hear me. You're not alone. I've seen how Victor treats you, the late shifts, the way he talks to you. It's not okay, and I'm here to stop it." Her breath caught, a sharp little gasp that broke the silence between them. Her eyes snapped up to his, wide and glistening, and for a second the mask she'd been wearing all night cracked. Fear, relief, disbelief. They swirled together in her gaze, fighting for dominance. I don't know what you mean," she said, but the words trembled, her hands shaking harder as she clutched the apron like a lifeline. The Rock shook his head gently. "You do. I heard you in the break room, saw how you flinched when he walked in just now. Jaden told me about the late nights, how he keeps you here alone. I know you're scared, and I know why, but it ends tonight, I promise you that." Lila's lips parted, a shaky breath escaping as tears welled up in her eyes. She shook her head, fast and desperate, like she could push the truth away. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't. He'll fire me. I need this job. I can't." She stopped, choking on the words, her hands flying to her mouth as if to hold them back. The Rock stepped closer, his presence solid and unyielding but not threatening. "He won't fire you," he said, his voice dropping to a fierce, quiet intensity. "He doesn't have that power. Not over you, not anymore. I'm taking care of it. You're safe now, Lila. You just have to trust me." Before she could respond, a shadow loomed beside them. Victor Grayson appeared, his clipboard tucked under one arm, his sharp features set in a mask of cool authority. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice smooth as polished steel, but laced with an edge that made Lila shrink back instinctively. His eyes flicked between her and the Rock, narrowing slightly as he assessed the situation. Lila, I told you to get back to work. What's going on?" She opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out, her body tensing like a coiled spring. The Rock turned slowly, squaring his shoulders as he faced Victor head-on. Just having a conversation, he said, his tone even but carrying a weight that made the air feel heavier. She's not feeling well. I was checking in. Victor's smile was tight, a thin line that didn't reach his eyes. She's fine, he said, his gaze shifting to Lila with a silent command. Aren't you? She nodded quickly, her voice a whisper. Yes, sir. But her hands betrayed her, trembling as they gripped her apron. The rock caught it, the flinch, the fear, and it lit a fire in his chest he couldn't contain anymore. He stepped forward, closing the distance between him and Victor, his height and bulk casting a shadow over the smaller man. She doesn't look fine to me, he said, his voice low and deliberate. And I think we need to talk right now. Victor's smile faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face before he masked it with irritation. Excuse me, he said, his tone sharpening. Who are you to tell me how to run my staff? This is a private matter, employees and management only. If you've got a complaint, take it to the hostess. The Rock didn't budge. His eyes locked onto Victor's with an intensity that made the manager shift his weight uncomfortably. Oh, it's private all right, the Rock said, reaching into his pocket. But not the way you think. He pulled out his wallet, flipped it open, and held up a card. His executive ownership credentials for Riptide Restaurant Group, the embossed logo glinting under the golden lights. The room seemed to freeze. Lila gasped, a soft, choked sound, her hands flying to her mouth. Nate, who'd been watching from the bar, dropped the glass he was holding, the shatter echoing through the sudden silence. Jaden, halfway across the floor with his tray, stopped dead, his eyes widening as he stared. Servers paused mid-step, customers turned in their seats, and even the jazz trio faltered, the saxophone trailing off into an awkward note. Victor's face drained of color, his clipboard slipping slightly in his grip as he stared at the card, then up at the Rock's face, recognition dawning with a sickening lurch. My name's Dwayne Johnson, the Rock said, his voice calm but ringing with authority, cutting through the stunned hush like a blade. I own this place, and you and I, we're going to have that talk, right now. A murmur rippled through the restaurant, whispers of the Rock and no way bouncing between tables as customers pulled out phones, some snapping pictures, others just gaping. Victor blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Sir, I didn't realize, he stammered, his polished facade crumbling. The Rock cut him off, his voice icy. No, you didn't. That's the problem, isn't it? He turned slightly, softening his tone as he addressed Lila, who stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. You're safe now, he said, a promise wrapped in every word. Stay here. This won't take long. Victor recovered enough to muster a weak protest. Sir, I assure you, there's been a misunderstanding. If you just let me explain. The Rock didn't let him finish. Your office, he said, pointing toward the back of the restaurant, his tone leaving no room for argument. Now! Victor swallowed hard, his confidence evaporating as he turned stiffly and led the way, his steps jerky and uneven. The Rock followed, his presence filling the space like a tidal wave. Every eye in Riptide locked on him as he crossed the floor. Customers whispered, servers exchanged wide-eyed glances, and Lila sank into a chair, her hands shaking but her shoulders lifting slightly, as if a weight had begun to shift. The office door clicked shut behind them, muffling the buzz of the restaurant. Victor's space was small and orderly, a desk piled with schedules, a filing cabinet in the corner, a single chair opposite the one he sank into now, his hands fidgeting on the polished wood. The Rock didn't sit. He stood, arms crossed, towering over the desk, his shadow swallowing the dim light from the desk lamp. Start talking, he said, his voice low and dangerous. And don't waste my time with excuses. I know what you've been doing, keeping Lila late, intimidating her, making her feel like she's got no choice. I want to hear it from you. Victor forced a laugh, a nervous, brittle sound that died in his throat under the Rock's unwavering stare. Sir, I don't know what you've heard, but I assure you, I've always conducted myself professionally. Lila's a good worker, but she struggles sometimes. I've been helping her, pushing her to improve. The Rock slammed a hand on the desk, the sound like a gunshot, making Victor jump. Don't, he growled. Don't sit there and lie to my face. I've got Jaden's word, Nate's hints, and Lila's tears telling me a different story. You've been playing power games with her, keeping her here alone, threatening her job if she doesn't obey. You think that's helping? You think I'm stupid enough to buy that? Victor's hands trembled, sweat beading on his forehead. Please, sir, I can explain. The Rock pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and a recording crackled to life. Jaden's voice hushed and urgent from earlier that night. He makes her stay late, alone. It's not right. She comes in looking like she hasn't slept, like she's afraid to breathe. Victor's face went ashen, his mouth working soundlessly as the words filled the room. The Rock stopped the playback, his eyes boring into Victor's. Explain that, he said, his voice a quiet thunder. Explain why my staff are scared of you. Explain why Lila's breaking down in my break room while you stand out there acting like you own the place. Victor slumped back, his hands dropping to his lap. I didn't mean, he started, but the Rock cut him off again. You didn't mean to what? To bully her? To trap her? You've been doing this for months, maybe longer, preying on people who need this job, who can't fight back. You think I'd let that slide? You think I'd let you turn my house into your little kingdom? He leaned forward, planting both hands on the desk, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You're done, Victor. You're out of here. Tonight. And you'll never work in this industry again. That's a promise. Victor's head jerked up, panic flaring in his eyes. Please, sir, I've got a family. I need this job. The Rock straightened, his expression unyielding. You should have thought of that before you decided to terrorize mine. He pulled out his phone again, dialing a number with a single tap. Yeah, it's Dwayne, he said when the line picked up. His HR director, a woman named Carla, who'd been with him since his first restaurant venture. Victor Grayson's terminated, effective immediately. I want him escorted out in 10 minutes, and I want his access revoked. Locks, systems, everything. Send me a replacement by Monday. He hung up without waiting for a reply, his eyes never leaving Victor's. The manager sat there frozen as the reality sank in. His power, his control, gone in an instant. The Rock stepped toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. You've got 5 minutes to grab your stuff, he said. Security's on their way. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. He walked out, leaving Victor staring blankly at the desk, the clipboard slipping from his limp fingers to the floor with a soft clatter. Back on the main floor, the atmosphere had shifted. Customers were still buzzing, some filming with their phones as whispers of, "The Rock owns this place," spread like wildfire. The staff had gathered near the bar, Nate, Jaden, a handful of servers, watching with a mix of shock and awe as The Rock emerged. Lila was still seated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, tears drying on her cheeks, but her posture straighter, lighter. He walked over to her, crouching slightly to meet her eyes. He's gone, he said softly. You're safe now. I mean it. Her lips parted, a shaky breath escaping as she processed his words. You're really... She started, but couldn't finish, her voice catching. He nodded, a small, reassuring smile breaking through his stern expression. Yeah, and I'm sorry it took me this long to see what was happening. That's on me, but it's over now. Lila's shoulders shook, a sob breaking free. Not of fear this time, but relief. She wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. Thank you, she whispered, the words raw and real. The Rock stood, turning to the staff clustered nearby. Their faces were a mix of disbelief, gratitude, and something else. Hope, maybe. He raised his voice just enough to carry. You've all been working under someone who didn't deserve his place here, he said. That changes tonight. I'm not just kicking him out, I'm fixing this. No one should feel scared to come to work, not in my house. We're going to talk, all of us, and make this right, starting now. The room was quiet, the weight of his words settling over them. Then Jaden stepped forward, his tray forgotten on a table behind him. Sir, thank you, he said, his voice steady for the first time that night. For her, for all of us. The Rock nodded, clapping a hand on his shoulder. You're welcome, but we're not done yet. Stick around after close, we've got work to do. He glanced back at Lila, who was standing now, wiping her face with a napkin someone had handed her. She met his eyes, and for the first time that night, she didn't look away. The Rock exhaled, the fire in his chest cooling slightly, replaced by a resolve he hadn't felt in a long time. Victor was gone, But this was just the beginning. The Rock stood in the center of Riptide's main dining area, the golden glow of the overhead lights casting long shadows across the polished stone floor. The restaurant was quieter now, the last of the customers trickling out into the humid Miami night, their voices fading as the glass doors swung shut behind them. The jazz trio had packed up their instruments, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional clink of glassware as the staff tidied up after the chaos of the evening. Victor Grayson was gone, escorted out by two security guards in crisp black uniforms just minutes ago, his head bowed, his clipboard left behind on the office desk like a discarded relic of his reign. The air felt lighter without him, but the Rock knew the weight of what had happened still lingered, pressing down on the shoulders of every employee who'd watched the scene unfold. He turned to face the staff gathered near the bar. Lila Bennett, Jaden Carter, Nate, and a dozen others, their aprons stained with the night's work, their faces a mix of exhaustion, relief, and uncertainty. Lila sat on a stool, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes still red but dry now, her posture less hunched, as if the invisible chains that had bound her were starting to loosen. Jaden stood beside her, arms crossed, his expression a blend of gratitude and lingering tension. Nate leaned against the bar, a rag slung over his shoulder, watching the Rock with a quiet respect that hadn't been there earlier. The others, servers, bussers, a couple of cooks who'd emerged from the kitchen, hovered in a loose semicircle, some shifting nervously, others staring at him like they still couldn't believe the man in the ball cap and t-shirt was the Dwayne Johnson, the owner who'd just turned their world upside down. The Rock took a deep breath, the scent of sea salt and leftover spices settling into his lungs. He'd faced bigger crowds, thousands screaming his name in arenas, millions watching him on screen. But this felt different, more personal. These weren't fans or critics. These were his people, the heartbeat of Riptide, and he'd let them down by not seeing Victor's shadow sooner. That guilt gnawed at him, but it fueled him too. He cleared his throat, his voice steady and warm as it broke the silence. "All right, listen up," he said, raising a hand to draw their eyes to him. "Tonight was a mess. You all saw it. Hell, you lived it longer than I did. Victor's gone, and he's not coming back. But I'm not here to just sweep this under the rug and call it a day. We're going to talk about what happened, and we're going to fix it. Together." A murmur rippled through the group, soft but audible. Surprise, maybe hope. Lila lifted her head, her gaze meeting his for a fleeting moment before dropping again. The Rock stepped closer, his boots scuffing lightly against the floor. "I built Riptide to be more than a restaurant," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "I wanted it to be a place where people, customers, staff, everyone, felt good, felt respected. That's the dream I had when I signed the lease, when I picked out every damn dish on that menu. But I screwed up. I trusted the wrong guy to run it, and you paid the price. That's on me, and I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Jaden shifted, uncrossing his arms, his brow furrowing like he wasn't sure how to process it. Nate's mouth opened slightly, then closed, a flicker of something, admiration maybe, crossing his face. The Rock kept going, his tone firm but laced with a quiet fire. "Victor didn't just make your lives harder. He made you afraid. Afraid to mess up, afraid to speak up, afraid to walk away. I heard it from Jaden, saw it in Lila's eyes, felt it in this room tonight. That's not what this place is supposed to be. No one should come to work feeling like they're stepping into a trap, and I'm here to make damn sure that never happens again." He paused, letting the words sink in, his eyes sweeping over the group. A server in the back, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a faded tattoo peeking out from his sleeve, spoke up, his voice tentative. "Sir, what happens now? I mean, Victor's gone, but—" He trailed off, glancing at his co-workers like he wasn't sure he should have opened his mouth. The Rock nodded, encouraging him. "Go on, say what's on your mind. This is your space too." The guy swallowed, then pressed on. "It's not just him. The way things run here, the pressure, the hours, the way we're scared to say anything, it's been like that for a while, even before Victor got bad." The Rock's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Jaden jumped in, his voice stronger now, emboldened by the opening. "He's right, sir. Victor was the worst, but it's bigger than him. We're always stretched thin, doubling shifts, skipping breaks, running on fumes. If we complain, we're told to suck it up or leave. I've seen people quit over it. Good people. And the rest of us, we just deal because we need the money. Nate nodded, stepping forward. Yeah, it's like we're machines, not people. Victor made it hell, but the cracks were already there. The Rock listened, his chest tightening with every word. He'd seen the profit margins, the glowing reviews, the packed tables every weekend, and thought it meant success. But he'd missed this. The human cost, the toll it took on the people who kept Riptide alive. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply, then looked at Lila. She hadn't spoken yet, her hands still twisted in her lap, but her eyes were on him now, steady and searching. Lila, he said gently, what about you? What do you need to say? She flinched at her name, a reflex from months under Victor's shadow, but then she straightened, taking a shaky breath. I didn't want to stay late, she said, her voice small but growing stronger with each word. He made me, said it was my job, inventory, cleaning, whatever he came up with. If I said no, he'd cut my hours or worse. I couldn't afford to lose this. I've got rent, bills, my mom's sick, and I send her what I can. So I stayed. Every time. Even when she stopped, her voice cracking, and the Rock felt a pang in his gut, knowing what she couldn't say. Even when it felt wrong, even when it scared her. He nodded, his expression softening. You shouldn't have had to choose between your job and your safety. None of you should. And that stops today. He turned back to the group, his voice rising with conviction. I'm not just here to fire one guy and call it fixed. I'm here to change how this place works, from the ground up. That means no more insane hours, no more skipping breaks, no more feeling like you've got a target on your back if you speak up. I want transparency, schedules you can live with, managers who listen, a system that doesn't grind you down, and I need your help to do it. You're the ones who know what's broken. Tell me and I'll fix it. A hush fell over the group, the weight of his promise settling in. Then Lila spoke again, her voice steadier now. Will you really listen? She asked, a challenge wrapped in hope. If we tell you what's wrong, will it matter? The Rock met her gaze, unflinching. Yes, he said simply. It matters to me. You matter to me, all of you. This isn't just my house anymore. It's ours. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded, a faint spark igniting in her eyes. Jaden stepped closer, his shoulders squaring. Okay, he said. I'm in. Let's make it better. Nate grinned, tossing the rag onto the bar. Me too. About time someone gave a damn. One by one, the others murmured agreement. A cook with a thick beard, a server with a nose ring, the wiry guy with the tattoo, all of them stepping into the circle, their voices overlapping in a tentative chorus of resolve. The Rock clapped his hands together, the sound sharp and rallying. Good. We'll start tomorrow. Full staff meeting, no holds barred. Bring your ideas, your gripes, everything. We're rebuilding this right. He paused, then added, and one more thing. You're all off the clock now. Go home, rest. You've earned it. A ripple of laughter broke through the tension, a small release that felt like the first breath of fresh air in hours. As the staff dispersed, some grabbing jackets from the break room, others lingering to chat, the Rock walked over to Lila, who was still seated, her hands finally still. You good? He asked, crouching slightly to her level. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, better than I've been in a while. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. He chuckled, shaking his head. Call me Dwayne, and you're welcome. You're tougher than you think, Lila. Don't forget that. She smiled fully then, a real one, and stood, joining Jaden and Nate as they headed for the door. The Rock watched them go, the trio talking quietly, their steps lighter than they'd been all night. He turned back to the empty restaurant, the tables cleared, the lights dimming as the last of the crew locked up. He walked to the window, looking out at the dark waves crashing against the shore beyond Ocean Drive, the city lights glittering like stars against the black water. He sank into a chair, running a hand over his face as the adrenaline faded, leaving a bone-deep fatigue in its wake. Tonight had been one battle, one restaurant, one manager, one moment of reckoning. But how many more were out there? How many riptides had he overlooked? How many Lilas were still afraid to speak? He thought of his own journey, from a kid washing dishes in Honolulu, to a wrestler scraping by, to a man who'd clawed his way to the top. He'd faced his share of victors, people who used power to break others, who saw weakness as an invitation to dominate. He'd beaten them every time, not just with strength, but with the stubborn belief that people deserve better. Leadership wasn't about profit margins or headlines, he realized, staring at the reflection of the empty room in the glass. It was about responsibility, about seeing the cracks, hearing the whispers, and stepping up when it counted. He'd missed it here, but he wouldn't again. Riptide would be the start, a model for every venture he touched, a promise kept not just to his staff, but to himself. He stood, grabbing his cap from the table, and headed for the door, the night air cool against his skin as he stepped outside. The waves roared in the distance, a steady rhythm that matched the resolve settling in his chest. One cycle broken, he muttered to himself, glancing back at the darkened windows of Riptide. Time to break a few more.